Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I'm bringing you a brand new tier list that I haven't done in almost 6 months. This is what if you have 0 CTPs MFF tier list. So there's a lot changed. There's tons of characters moved around. There's brand new categories. I basically redid all of this from scratch. So I want to just explain this to you and break it down for you, because I think it's actually going to be really helpful for you. And it's not going to necessarily make characters better or worse. The regular tier list still applies for the actual value of characters, but it may help you figure out, okay, I really want to max out this character next, or I really want to work towards this character next, if you don't have a particular CTP for them. And if you're coming back to the game and you're seeing in your inventory you have a bunch of CTPs and you don't know who to put them on, this will also help you figure out and prioritize which characters really need a CTP, versus which characters don't really. Because the last time I did this tier list was before World Boss Legend even existed, before Null and Mephisto were even a thing. So it's much more important now, also before fragment farming was basically as big of, I think it was even, no, fragment farming already existed. I can't remember, but it wasn't very popular, and it wasn't, the rewards were much worse than they are now. So yeah, let's jump right into it. So this no CTP tier list is meant to highlight characters and really reorganize characters based on how well they perform with an obelisk versus how badly they need a CTP. I'm not saying that Deadpool is the best character in the game. If you're, he's not the best character on your account, even if you don't have any CTPs. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what I'm trying to say is his performance with an obelisk versus a CTP is very, very similar. So he's essentially an obelisk god, because you almost can't tell the difference between a CTP of energy and like a crit damage 200 proc obelisk. Does that make sense? That's sort of what I'm trying to get across with some of these rankings. So we've got Obelisk Gods, which is pretty self-explanatory. We've got Obelisk Demigods, not quite as good as Obelisk Gods, but still very, very good and very proc friendly. Very proc friendly with an obelisk. Then we have Needs Great RNG. We're starting getting into the gray area. You know, sometimes they're going to proc well, sometimes not. They can be frustrating to play. And the thing is, you can look at these 3 rankings, and you can look at these rankings and say, I could still give them a CTP of energy. I could still give them a CTP of destruction. So that still works almost exactly the same. If you look at these characters, you take a look down these lists, you're going to see characters like Iron Fist. You're going to see characters like Moon Knight, Venom, Gambit. They're really good with an obelisk, and they're also really good with a CTP of energy, because the proc is the same whether you have an energy or whether you have an obelisk. Now, once we get into the 4th category here, CTP needed, and then in brackets DPS. What this means is they're going to need a CTP almost exclusively. I'm talking about Rage and Judgment, because like I just explained, energy can basically be, if you can proc on an obelisk, you can proc on an energy with a character. So when it says CTP, I'm talking about Judgment and Rage almost exclusively. You could do a little bit of Greed, you could do a little bit of some other CTPs, but almost exclusively Rage and Judgment, because it's DPS. Then over here, CTP useful for support is very straightforward. You're going to be giving this character an insight. You don't have to give them an insight. They can definitely do other things besides be a support character, but that is a very popular use for the character. And then these last 3 categories. So in the past, instead of having these categories, I had CTP wasted ? And I just feel like that's too negative, and I don't really want to go that route anymore. That's not really what I'm about. So rather than doing that and sort of implying that some characters are not worth your CTP, because you know what, whoever you want to play with, that's who deserves your CTP, right? If you're gonna have fun playing with Wolverine, knock yourself out. Go give him a CTP of Rage, right? But then you have to know, should I give this character a CTP of Rage, or can they work with it with an energy or with a proc? So I broke it down into 2 categories. We've got CTP needed, not meta. Very self-explanatory. They're basically in the same category as CTP needed DPS, but they're just not meta, so they're not going to be able to do endgame content well. They can still do some endgame content, like if you have enough Pierce and Nightcrawler has a Rage, he can do some Null. Same goes for a lot of these other characters, but you sort of get what I'm saying. And then we have easy proc, not meta. So easy proc is basically the same thing as the, Obelisk God, Demigod, whatever, but they're not meta at all. They can still work for content, lower level world boss, Shadowland, things like that, but they're not going to be able to do World Boss Legend and DRX and GBR and Squad Battle and ABX, or they're going to score and do very, very poorly on those game modes compared to other characters. Then we, of course, have all the way on the side, you can't really see it very well, but we've got Needs Rework. Very self-explanatory. I went ahead and I put Elsa, Silk, Sif, and Heimdall in this category just because it's painful. It's definitely painful. I think they can all work with a proc, to be honest, if you wanted to. Maybe Elsa is the easiest, and then Silk, Sif, and Heimdall are a little bit harder, and you want to give them a rage. Just off the top of my head, I think that's the case. If you really love those characters and you want to make it work with them. But anyways, now that I've explained to you what this breakdown is, I want to just now go in and talk about some specific characters and highlight characters that I think really represent the different categories, so you can get an even better idea of what we're talking about. Additionally, I want to let you guys know, love that word, I did try to focus on using mostly tier 3 and transcended characters in the first 2 here for Obelisk Gods and Demigods, and then I used almost exclusively tier 3 and transcended characters for needs CTP DPS, because at the end of the day, although you can build whoever you want, you should be, at least putting some of your resources towards characters that are useful for endgame content, right? You want to build a little bit of that. So those 3 categories are sort of the most important in my mind, or the most highlighted, because they're going to feature 100% or like 95% transcended or transcendable and tier 3able, tier 3 characters or native tier 3s as well. So yeah, we've got Deadpool, Daredevil, and Spider-Gwen in the Obelisk Gods here for speed types. Again, I'm just organizing it by typing to make it a little bit easier for you to figure out. Moon Knight is probably one of the best examples of just being really good with an obelisk, and then he transitions super well into a CTP of energy. Maker is sort of the opposite, where, not the opposite of Moon Knight, but Maker sort of in between. He can definitely work with an energy, but you can also see why he works really well with a CTP of Rage. On the flip side, you can also see Human Torch. He can kind of work with an obelisk if you're fast enough canceling. You can just do 3 cancel 6, cancel 4, and proc on that, or 3 cancel 6 and proc on 6, and then just do 4 afterwards. But you can also see that his potential is almost better off with a Judgment. But Human Torch just hits so hard, and you can actually cancel 3 and 5 pretty quickly, that I think he does deserve to be an Obelisk God, and he just hits so hard with an Obelisk still that he definitely deserves to be here. Iron Man, a new addition. Vision, a new addition. Again, you can make it work with Vision with an Obelisk. You can also make it work with a Rage, but he's still able to shine so well with an Obelisk that I think he definitely deserves to be an Obelisk God. So these characters here, I think especially, are really good if you can also match them up on the tier list and see where they land. If they land on the top, if they land in the True Gods category, so Null, Vision, Beta Ray Bill, Moonstone, Human Torch, Sharon Rogers, Cable, I think that's it. Those would be like the best characters in the game to invest in right now, regardless of where you're at CTP and Obelisk wise, because they're like, they could perform with basically nothing equipped. That's how strong they are. And then for Obelisk Demigods, these characters are either a little bit harder to proc with, and you're gonna have to practice a little bit more, or they're just not as good. So for example, Luke Cage, he's almost exclusively for PvP, so I'm obviously not talking about PvE for him. He can make it work in PvE, or in PvP, sorry, in timeline battle and things like that, with an Obelisk, but we're starting to get into the territory where you might want to think about, it's not that he needs RNG necessarily to win, because you're just going to want to give him like a guard break, max HP, and invincibility proc, but it's that he's just not going to perform quite as well as he would with a regen, which would then push him into, a different sort of territory. New characters like Cersei, just really, really good with an Obelisk, but just now and then you're going to miss procs. You're going to, it's not going to line up perfectly for you every single time. So that's why they're not quite on the level of these characters, and they obviously can't go to as high of a ranking. So, Yelena, Scarlet Spider, Gwenpool, and Scorpion, basically almost all of the speed types here. They're good for other content, and I wanted to highlight as well speed villains, right? So Scorpion, some rare categories of characters, but they're not really gonna be able to do, they can't physically do endgame content. And then Ant-Man, Kamala, and Cersei, because Invisible Woman just got her Transcendence. Jean Grey is also here. She can work with an Obelisk, but again, it's exclusively PvP. So I'm not differentiating between PvP and PvE here, but you should know from my previous tier list and from previous character reviews, Kamala Khan, Hulk, Luke Cage, to a lesser extent, Yelena, but she's also really good for PvE. And then Jean Grey, and actually Invisible Woman, I'm almost exclusively referring to their value in PvP, right? So again, Jean Grey, great with a greed, great with a regen, but honestly, she can still get kills if you give her an Obelisk. That's how scary she is in PvP. She's still one of the best with just an Obelisk. Needs great RNG. You're definitely going to miss procs. You're definitely going to miss procs with these characters. So if you're not the type that likes to miss procs, or if it gets annoying to you, or you just don't like seeing the character miss, then you may want to not build the character at all. And to be honest, none of these characters are very meta. Thor is the closest to being meta, but and Scarlet Witch. But otherwise, you know, they're kind of on the fringes. On top of the fact that, you know, they're not going to give you the most, I don't know, it's not the most consistent performance with an Obelisk. It can still work, and it can be really satisfying when it works, but I also think it can be kind of frustrating. And then CTP needed is, you know, it's Doctor Strange. He's the perfect example of, like, if you give them anything but a CTP of Rage or a CTP of Judgment, you're really going to be pulling your hair out. The interesting thing here with Rogue is she basically needs a Judgment. It's not even a Rage, so you got to be careful. Some of these characters you can swap one or the other, like Apocalypse. You could give him a Rage or a Judgment. Namor, you could sort of give him a Rage or a Judgment, but other characters, obviously, Bullseye Hawkeye has to be a Rage. Luna could be Rage or Judgment, but Rogue has to be Judgment. Mephisto, I think it has to be Judgment, but I think it could be Rage. So you got to be a little bit careful. Some of them are flexible, some of them are not, obviously. Magneto and Star-Lord have to be a Rage. Enchantress could be a Judgment. Cap has to be a Rage. Cap, I kind of feel bad. I don't think he deserves to be in this category with these characters. Him and Enchantress are by far the two worst, or not worst, the two weakest. Enchantress just can't do endgame content, and Cap struggles to do endgame content. But I just didn't feel like putting him in the not meta category. It felt kind of sad to put him next to Negasonic and Iceman. He is a lot better than Negasonic and Iceman. No offense to Iceman fans, but yeah. And then for the Universals, there's a lot of Universals that just don't really work with an Obelisk or a regular CTP of Energy. It's just very difficult. Sentry, some people get it to work with an Energy. I personally think it's a headache that you don't want. You know, if you end up needing to do it for whatever reason, because of your build limitations, fine. But I honestly think that a Rage or another CTP is a better option for him. And then I included, even though they're not as meta, they're actually technically weaker than Captain America, I included Molecule Man, Doctor Doom, and Dormammu for different reasons. So Molecule Man and Dormammu, I included them because they're humans, so they can do that squad battle in Vibranium that's very, very rare. You basically just have Cosmic Ghost Rider, Molecule Man, and Doctor Doom that can do it, and I guess Victorious. And then Dormammu because, again, sort of like Captain America, he's not bad enough to be in a category with Thane and Corvus, but he's also not quite good enough to be hanging in PvP with the likes of these cats up here at the top, or in PvE, ABX, and things like that with these guys. Useful supports, you're obviously not going to have this many CTPs of Insight. Even a big whale like me, I don't have this many CTPs of Insight, so don't freak out, don't panic, don't feel bad. Alex wants me to put a CTP of Insight on Beast? No. What I basically did is I chose all the characters. I tried to round up all the characters that have support buffs and or leaderships so that you can get the most out of them in multiple different ways. Groot is probably the one that shouldn't be here out of all of them, and maybe Sunbird, but you might want to just give one of the three Warriors of the Sky an Insight if you're going to be using the three of them together. But yeah, all of these characters are going to give you some sort of support buff. Obviously, there are some really popular ones: White Fury, Nick Fox, Colossus, Jessica Jones, Thing, Dr. Voodoo, Ghost Panther, and Richard Rider, Nova, Phyla-Vell, if you're using them for like one-shotting and things, Green Goblin with the new Blast uniform, so stuff like that. Again, Storm could have other value. I'm sorry to Storm fans out there. She's not, you know, as bad as Green Goblin and Weapon Hex and Dazzler as a standalone character, but she's sort of getting over to Insight support territory because they're just much better characters to be used in DRX, in fragment farming, in World Boss Legend, that she can fill that role with her 35% increased elemental damage. And then yeah, essentially CTP needed, not meta, would basically be this, but the continuation of this ranking, but just not as good. And then these guys would be the continuation of Obelisk Demigods, but just not as good. So it's a bit tricky to do this kind of a tier list, and I know that some people are going to disagree with me. Keep in mind that it's just my opinion. It's not indicative of how you have to play the game or how you have to gear your characters. Of course, you can gear your characters however you want. Have fun with the game, do your thing. but I just wanted to give people a little bit more information based on my own experiences. I try to test every character that comes out now with an Obelisk before I transition them into a CTP, so I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on who can perform well with an Obelisk versus who sort of needs a CTP to reach their full potential. And that's really what the tier list is about. It's not about, you know, saying, like, confusing you and saying, oh, these characters are suddenly the best in the game now. No. It's more like these characters can definitely make it work without a CTP, which would be these 3 rows. So, you know, if you're short on CTPs, you don't necessarily have to give these guys one immediately. And then these ones here, especially if you're going to build them up, because they're so expensive, you got to go all the way to tier 3, all the way to Transcended or whatever, you're going to want to give them a CTP, right? It's like, you're not going to go all the way. You're not going to buy a fancy car and then not kit it out with a leather interior, or not pay for the premium gasoline, or not. This is not a very good analogy, but you sort of get what I'm saying, right? If you're going to go all the way, go all the way. So yeah, hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of the no CTP tier list. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.